Sagittal slice, excellent. And of course, we're missing the cerebellum, which is down here, and the brainstem over here.
Yeah.
That makes sense? Mid-sagittal?
Mid-sagittal, middle.
Oh, you know, but so if that's the mid-sagittal view, then what would the coronal view look like?
That.
Slices.
Okay.
We should probably slice the brain today if we have time. I know that you guys have to go to histology, but we should probably slice it.
Okay, so, okay, so the,
All right, double
the,
tap.
fr-
Here we go. You guys ready?
okay.
Here's going to come a lot of content all at once. You ready?
You ready, Judas?
Okay, so I asked you to just lobes of the brain. The easier way to look at the lobe would be to look at the lateral surface of the brain. Can you look at the lateral surface of the brain first? Excellent. So you're showing us the lateral surface. Grab your probe.
Oh,
Frontal lobe.
the frontal lobe is over here.
Excellent.
How I can tell is because it's kind of more, it's like kind of more spacious compared to the back, which is more tightly
I wouldn't
knit.
use the gyri and sulci right now as a way to distinguish between the lobes. I'm
Oh,
going to give
really?
you the borders, right?
Okay.
These are gyri and sulci. You guys remember that from anatomy, right? Sulci are the valleys, the dips. The gyri are the bumps, right?
Okay.
Okay. And then I also ask you to find the parietal lobe. Where's the parietal lobe?
Parietal lobe, right here.
Close. It's back here, right? This is the
Oh.
parietal lobe. Parietal. What does parietal mean?
To the side.
The side is the
Side.
wall.
Yeah.
The wall.
But why wouldn't it be like over here?
Because the central, right, separates the
Right.
side.
So what separates the?
Side.
It goes all the way up to the top. It goes all the way along the side like that.
Okay.
So this is all parietal lobe right here. What separates? Don't put the probe down.
Okay.
What separates the parietal lobe from the frontal lobe?
Central sulcus.
Central sulcus. Actually, good. The central all the way from this long fissure in the middle of the brain that divides the two hemispheres. This is the right hemisphere of the brain, right?
So the corpus callosum.
So this
divides
separates the.
The corpus callosum actually connects the two hemispheres,
Yeah.
right? This is the corpus callosum here.
Well, then what divides the two hemispheres?
A fissure. This fissure, the longitudinal fissure,
Oh, okay.
like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So what's the corpus
See, I always thought it was the corpus
This.
callosum that.
Parietal.
Corpus callosum. We'll talk about the corpus callosum when we get over there. Okay. So
What did we say this is called again?
that's called the central sulcus. Everyone has a central sulcus. It travels all the way from the longitudinal fissure all the way down to this fissure over here, which is
Occipital, parietal, occipital.
nope.
This area right here.
That where what's my finger?
Lateral, sylvan.
That's the sylvan fissure, right? The sylvan fissure which separates the frontal and parietal lobes from. You answer.
Wait.
Go ahead. The temporal lobe.
Yeah, the temporal lobe. That's what I know. This is the
Yeah.
temporal for a fact.
Temporal, frontal, parietal.
And this is the occipital, the back.
We didn't have this much fumes problem on Monday. I can hear the fans going, but one of these. So we should wrap these guys up and put them back in their jar. Let's do that. Let's do that quickly. So not central
Not
fissure,
central
central sulcus. Okay.
So this is
And-
the frontal.
Jake, are
The
you all right?
Parietal.
parietal's right here.
Parietal's right
The
there.
terminal is
Not terminal, temporal.
temporal.
What are they named for?
No,
The bones in the skull. Frontal, temporal, occipital, parietal, all those
Yeah.
bones.
Yeah.
They're named for the bones that are on top of them. Okay? Now, why did I ask you to do the central sulcus? Because it divides the frontal lobe from the parietal lobes.
Okay.
Right? This is a gyrus here that is just anterior to the central sulcus. We call that gyrus the
Precentral.
precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus is primary
Motor function.
motor cortex, yes, or M1. Right? What does it mean to be a primary cortex?
First area.
First area, it's the closest area to the peripheral nervous system. It's the area that gets you, right?
Primary means closer to peripheral.
Well, it's for a primary sensory cortex is the first cortical area that receives input from the peripheral nervous system or from another area of the nervous system. It's the first place that a particular type of sensory information arrives in cortex.
Okay.
Primary motor cortex is the last place the commands go before they leave the cortex and head down to start controlling lower motor neurons that will cause your muscles to contract.
Wait, so would you say that was the first place that they received stimulus?
So there are different types of primary cortices. There's primary motor cortex.
Should be the first to receive motor signals.
You don't receive motor signals.
Alright,
You
perceive.
send
Send
motor.
them.
You send
Send
motor
them,
signals.
send them.
Right.
Okay.
So they are.
Right, okay.
So the primary motor cortex is the last area in cortex before you send the signal out to the spinal cord to move your muscles.
Okay.
The primary sensory cortices. This is occipital cortex, which is primary visual cortex. This is Heschel's gyrus, primary auditory cortex. Deep in the insular cortex is primary gustatory cortex, right? Taste, right? And this gyrus right here is called the
Post-central.
post-central gyrus. Excellent. And it is primary.
Motor.
No,
Sensory.
pre-central is primary motor. Post-central is,
Sensory.
be more specific. I just told you that
Primary
this.
sensory.
I just told you that this is sensory because it's visual.
Visual.
That's visual. That's auditory. And you're telling me this is sensory. What does sensory mean? Sensory covers too many things.
Senses.
Primary. Where's the information coming from?
Oh, peripheral.
It's coming from the peripheral nervous system around your body, right? What do we say? What do we call body in science? The body is the soma.
Oh.
So that's primary somatosensory cortex. Because there's lots of primary sensory cortices, right? But this is primary somatosensory cortex. This is information from your body. If you were alive, and this was your brain, and I stimulated with an electrode here and passed current and excited those neurons, you would feel a sensation somewhere in your body. And in fact, there is a map along the primary sensory cortex of, well, information coming from your body. How does your brain know where the information came from? There's a map here. Information from your hand always arrives at the same neurons in cortex. Right? It's mapped out. Okay, you got it?
Yeah.
All right, what else were we looking for? This is
That's
occipital cortex
occipital.
back here. By the way, I'm
Back.
stealing a little bit of your presentation time because some people have to get the histology. So
Okay,
I hope you will.
The parietal occipital sulcus.
Okay. So here's the interesting thing, right? I'm telling you, right? I'm gonna steal this for a sec. This is parietal lobe and this is occipital lobe. And you're like, how the does he tell like the difference between those? Better to look at the inside,
Medial.
The corpse.
the corpus callosum, right?
Corpus callosum.
Better to look at the mid-sagittal slice
Oh.
and see that there is in fact a sulcus along here, the parietal occipital sulcus. That's how you tell. Right there.
Gotcha.
Okay, that's how you tell the difference there between parietal lobe and occipital lobe. By the way, what lobe is this?
Temporal.
Temporal. Excellent. Good.
How
Did I
you
ask
know?
you? Because it's temporal lobe, the whole thing.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just this is medial temporal lobe.
Oh, the little. So on this side, this little thing. That's what she. Oh, she just identified it from a different side.
Yeah, but it's
Oh.
still there. You flip it over, it's still there.
Yeah.
All right, pack these guys into that jar again
Yeah.
before everybody falls over, keels over, and dies.
Don't put that big one in yet. Why splash on my hand?
It's going like straight to my head.
Yeah, these are big
Wait.
pieces.
So tired.
Wait.
I'm gonna be awake. I'm gonna be watching this histology because I'm gonna be like so tired. I'm gonna be falling asleep while I look at the microscope.
Juices.
All right,
Yeah.
that one's too much.
Yeah.
All right,
This one is.
This one's okay.
This one's less intense, guys.
all right. So now I asked them to look at. Jay, can you go get the Vulcan spacecraft that is over there?
What is that?
Vulcan spacecraft.
I don't know.
The
what
wax.
it
See,
is.
I knew he would know. Doesn't it have like it look could be? You know, it's kind of like it's not exactly, but it has like that
General
quality
shape
about
to it, yeah.
Okay, so these are the ventricles of the brain. Lateral ventricles, right? This portion is in the frontal lobe. This portion is in the occipital lobe, and this portion is in the temporal lobe. It follows the course of the lobes as they bend around. In the center portion, these are two paired structures. We have some unitary structures, right? We have the third ventricle here. That's the third ventricle. Cerebral aqueduct, fourth ventricle. All right? So, we did never. All right. We got some stuff to do. Or else we'll. All right. So, can you please, with the probe, identify where the ventricles are on one of these coronal slices? Excellent. So there's the ventricles, right? What's just superior to the ventricles?
The fornix? Or no?
Is this what you're talking?
What's this?
The
What's this?
corpus callosum.
Corpus callosum, right. And so that's actually in this orientation. Do you see that? Sliced like this. Corpus callosum going across the top, or superior to it. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So which direction is this? If this brain had eyes, which direction would they be looking? Up. up, right? This person would be lying on their back, right, looking up.
Is the thing in the middle above the is that the Soa turcica?
Okay, yeah.
No.
No. Okay, never mind.
Grab the skull.
She said no.
I just started something.
I mean, yeah, but is there a term for like when
My
someone's
bad. The
laying
Soa
on their back?
turcica's right here. Never mind.
Point to it.
Right here.
Exactly.
Supine.
Supine,
Supine.
right? Supine
Yeah.
and then
Posterior.
Right.
Or prone, sorry.
supine is when your nose up and
Yeah.
prone is when your nose down.
Yeah.
Got it.
Right.
Anyway, keep going.
Okay. We'll get to the Soa turcica when we come to the military.
Lateral.
All right. Okay, and so here's what she's describing to you guys now. And I'm going to describe them, and she's going to point to them while I describe them. And the best, this is, you like,
Well, he doesn't have a
It's like a
hippocampus.
puzzle.
no,
So
no.
this guy?
Yeah, this one is good. Maybe on the other side better? No, you had it better
No.
here. These two are pretty good. Let's put these away. Yeah, let's put those over there. And just use these guys here.
Okay.
Okay, so what she's describing is a series of nuclei that sit inside the sort of the comfort of the ventricles. Okay, the caudate nucleus, which she will indicate here,
The air in here?
right here. You see how it has all those pinholes in it? What does that tell you?
People are
People were pinning it for an exam. Okay.
Wait, where is it?
right here.
That'll let you get people to stand up and pay attention, right? You guys.
So like right here.
Right, exactly. Boom. Same one. That's the caudate nucleus. The caudate nucleus has its head tucked right in here, and then the body moves in this direction, and then finally the tail follows the inside, follows inferior and medial. First it's inferior, then it becomes medial to the lateral ventricles. It's shaped like a C. C for caudate. Okay.
C for coffee.
Right, and then the caudate nucleus wraps around some nuclei that are sitting in the center, right? The largest and its partner in crime is called the putamen. Excellent. There's the putamen. She found the putamen. It's this guy right along there. Boom.
Oh,
There's the
got it.
putamen.
Tame in a hole.
Jim and get in
No.
there.
Get right here.
Yeah.
That's the putamen.
Putamen.
Okay? That's the putamen right there.
Where?
Right here
Okay.
and right there.
Together, the caudate and the putamen form the striatum.
Oh.
Okay? And the striatum you will hear about because it's fundamental in learning processes, and we'll talk about the striatum a little bit more when we talk about the
Fundamental in
vasoganglia.
my learning process.
It is. It is. Okay? And then nestled just medial and inferior to the putamen are the two globus pallidus nuclei, which are most easily seen here. There's one and then two. There's the external segment. So it's tricky. You have to look at the reflection here, but there is a white line that separates the putamen from the globus pallidus external segment, or pars externus, and another line of white matter that separates the external from the internal globus pallidus. Globus pallidus is the pale globe, right? And let's walk away from this for a second and look at that over there very quickly. So this is what we were looking at here, over there. Here is the lateral ventricle. The caudate nucleus is a little bit, it's kind of like, the caudate nucleus is the wall of the lateral ventricle there. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Right? Then there is this structure, white matter structure, which we didn't talk about, but you guys identified. It's called the internal capsule. Okay, the internal capsule carries fibers that start out in the precentral gyrus, in primary motor cortex. Okay, and we're going to watch how they travel to get out of the brain. Right? In this internal capsule here, if you were in development, if you would stay there, if you were the caudate and you were the putamen, get together. You were developing together, right? And then the internal capsule in development comes through and kind of pushes you away, right? But you guys will still put your arms between. You will still have connections as I try to get through, and those connections are called stria, striations. Hence, they are together the striatum. All right. So these guys are there are actually striations through there, but you often don't see them when you slice the brain coronally. Okay. Then we have the putamen, the globus pallidus external segment, and the globus pallidus internal segment. Putamen, GPE, and GPI. Okay. those are those structures in there. Why am I telling you about those structures? Because the basal ganglia is one, super important in many diseases, right? Fundamental to the basic functioning of the brain, and was also the subject of my dissertation. So you guys have to tolerate it. No, it's actually very important to know what the basal ganglia are.
So we have to tolerate it. That's fine.
All right. Can I Google a movie? All right. So can you find the internal capsule for us? It's you're going the wrong direction. This is the internal capsule,
Oh, okay.
right? That's the internal capsule.
How was she able to know that? How was she?
So, ventricles. Use the ventricles as your orientation.
Okay.
Ventricles,
The
caudate, followed by a white matter tract that is
the
internal capsule, followed by a series of gray matter structures, which are
The putamen.
good. Say it again. Keep going. And
And the external and internal
Globus.
Say it.
Globus pallidus.
pallidus, the pale globes.
Yeah, we did.
That deserves a dance. That was well done. Yay. Okay, so those are those structures are in here. Now, a couple other structures we're going to look at. What we know is that if we slice the brain coronally like this, we'll see the lateral ventricles in the superior portion. We will also see the lateral ventricles inferiorly. Where will we see those? You want to do it? No, that's still the lateral ventricles there. What we've done is we've sliced through here, chunk, and then come through. This is tissue, and we hit it again. It's right here.
Oh.
That's the lateral ventricle again.
That's weird. Why is it so like? It's like that kind of.
No, it's sliced like this. Oh, you mean it's over laterally?
Yeah.
Well, these guys could flare out a little bit more in the Vulcan spacecraft.
No, third would be like.
Correct. Third is where she's indicating
fourth
right there.
would be like further
Down
down.
there, right? And so, why am I showing you that portion of the lateral ventricle? Well, right along here, the temporal lobe, in this medial area in here is the medial temporal lobe, which is fundamental to declarative memory. And there is a really critical structure in there called the hippocampus. Yes, the hippocampus, right along there. It runs like a little hostess cake. It's like a Swiss roll that's rolled up like that.
So
So-
that's underneath the ventral.
This thing.
Yep.
Lateral ventricle.
Where is it?
This thing. It looks
That's
like a
it right there.
seahorse.
See that little curve right there? Right there?
Okay, so over
Yeah.
here.
That little curly Q? It was, no, she said it looks like a seahorse. She's right. It's named the hippocampus. Hippo in Greek is horse, and campus is the sea.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hippocampus is the,
Latin field, yeah.
they're those.
And what is that
lateral
responsible of?
spots, right?
That supports, nothing is solely responsible for anything in the brain, but it
Okay.
supports declarative memory.
Okay.
Things that you know that you know. No, it's important. There are things that you know that you don't know. Like all sorts of internal
Is this it right
biases
here?
and
The lateral-
things that you've
lateral
learned.
ventricle.
This is the lateral ventricle. Yeah, that's
Okay.
the
The
hippocampus.
seahorse, the hippocampus.
Oh, I want to take a
Yeah.
nap.
Yep.
Really bad.
There's a good shot of the hippocampus. See the curly Q right there?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that is.
So in
Swirly
the center,
training.
the lateral ventricle.
Excellent. Excellent.
And then
Where's that?
Anything else that I asked you to find?
the insula.
Okay. So here, this is insular cortex in there. Tell me where the Sylvan fissure is. Yeah, that's the Sylvan fissure that we determined divided. This is a frontal parietal. I'm not sure if it's probably frontal lobe up here because it's
Frontal parietal.
right frontal parietal from temporal. So which lobe is this?
Temporal.
Right, and that's medial, so that's the medial temporal lobe in there, the MTL. Right, Sylvan fissure, insular cortex. Awesome. Insular cortex involved in one of my favorite things. When you put taste and smell together, you get flavor.
Oh.
The essence of food.
The essence of food, right? I mean, you know that when you hold your nose and eat, you don't
You
doesn't
guys-
taste
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
Yeah, because there's no flavor. It's just
I
it's
try it.
basic.
And my dad had like
All right.
really bad flu, and he tried to eat.
Load these back up into there.
Silver fish.
Sylvan fissure. Load these back up into there, and we'll go next. You good?
You want me to help you, Val?
So this is fissure, okay.
What's that?
Wait, this is the lateral ventricle, right? But when you showed it to us on
They're
this
not on
side,
here.
so where's
We only see the lateral ventricles here. We're gonna bring the ventricles over there, though. We'll see them. What's that?
But like when you, so this is also part of the lateral.
I mean, like, I
No.
can't smell me anymore. So.
This is a Sylvan fissure.
But what about when you showed us
This.
if you cut a corona?
Oh, yeah.
This is it.
That's the
Okay.
lateral ventricle. Lateral ventricle is like this, and then goes back in.
Okay, and then it would
It's like
be-
cutting a macaroni, like macaroni and cheese, the C shape. You can see the hole from both sides. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so this would be goes to the lateral ventricle right here.
Yep. There we go. Up and back.
Oh, I have a stronger than this.
All right.
Really going out of the room. Like,
Who's working on this? Who was working on this? Valerie? You're on.
You're on.
for what?
Show us the brain.
Oh God.
Valerie is fine.
Description of the brain.
Okay. So the corpus callosum is right here.
Okay, what do you notice about that corpus callosum?
Can you go like prop it up?
It looks like it's smaller.
Looks small, doesn't it?
This right here?
Yeah.
Oh, it's thin.
It's thin, that's right. What does that mean? What is the corpus callosum?
Is there a connection between the hemispheres?
Yeah, so
There's
I'm gonna give you guys just a basic understanding. So gray matter and white matter. What's in the gray matter?
Cell body.
Cell bodies, interneurons, glial cells, neuropil, all that stuff, right? And then when the axon leaves the gray matter, it's like it yells to the oligodendrocytes, and the oligodendrocytes are like, okay, we'll just wrap you in myelin, right? And so then it goes in this white matter track, right? Until it reaches its target, at which point you have axonal boutons and it does this work and it delivers the information, right? So let me ask you a question. Can you find the same neuron both in gray matter and in white matter? Yeah, absolutely. You have to because the myelinated portion, the axons, have to come from some cell body somewhere, right? And those cell bodies are in gray matter, right? So don't think of them as separate. They're just, it's the surrounding, the supporting tissue that's different. It's not the neurons that are different, it's the supporting tissue. Okay.
Is the only difference myelination or?
No, there's other differences too. There's
Okay.
not nearly as much physiological support in the white matter as there is
In gray matter.
in gray matter,
Okay.
right? Okay, so we've got this side of the brain, right? I'm on the right side of the brain, and I'm in layer 3, and I'm like, my job is to connect to the same side of the other side of the brain, right? So I send my axon out, come over to the other side of the brain. What did I cross on? What's that structure that I just went across on? Corpus callosum. Okay, now look at this one. Look at how this is all, if we were to look at that carefully, we would see the ends of all these axons that were coming out, right? Over here. And that's nice and thick, right? Here's the splenum and the genu. Genu is the knee of the corpus callosum and the body of the corpus callosum. It's actually, that's what it is, the genu. You know, what do you do when you stand before, here, Queen Victoria! What do we do when we stand before her? We genuflex. You flex your knee. No, that's it. There you go. And you should just walk
Can I make
around.
like a royal decree?
You can. Make a royal, what's a royal decree?
We all pass the class.
Yes.
She just decreed that to you guys. You're under royal decree to pass the class.
Victoria's the queen.
I know. I missed it. I was talking. You couldn't hear it over the sound of my own voice. All right.
I've witnessed this on video.
So this is all those axons passing. What happened here?
The connection got smaller.
It got smaller, right? So if we look at the cortex over here, on this side is even more obvious. Look at all that space. Look at all that space in there. Why would you possibly leave so much space inside the skull? The skull is the single most limiting factor in getting smarter, right? We have to have a skull that can pass through the birth canal, but also
Withstand.
it also withstand, and we jam all this material in here. This is all folded up to get lots more space, lots more, like as much computational power. We delay the development of our brain by years so that we can come out and have a squishy brain, and then it solidifies, and then we spend years building our brain. Why would you leave that much space? The answer is you wouldn't, right? This is a brain that has undergone severe degradation in life, right? So this person had dementia. And when the cell body dies in the gray matter, right? When the cell body dies in the gray matter,
It dies in the white matter.
the axon disappears too. The axon undergoes degeneration. And look, not only do we have a really thin corpus callosum, but look at the size of the ventricle.
It's huge.
It's huge. right? So what's happening there? As the cells die, they leave a vacancy, and the production of cerebral spinal fluid, CSF, continues and just makes the ventricles bigger and bigger so that the brain is still pressurized.
This is big.
Keep going.
Where are we at?
Oh
So
my gosh.
this is the fissure.
Fornix.
Oh yeah, the fornix. My bad.
There's a connection between the hippocampus and other parts of the brain. That's how the hippocampus gets across to the other side of the brain.
Man, there's a better mammillary body on this one. This is the mammillary body. Right here.
Close.
Really? It's not?
So the mammillary bodies are,
Really?
because the first thing to do, I picked up the brain, so now what's the first thing I have to do?
Orient yourself.
Orient yourself. This is a mid-sagittal slice, and I'm looking at the inferior or superior area of the brain.
Inferior.
Inferior portions of the brain, and so this is actually the ventral surface, and this is the dorsal surface. Okay, right. So the mammillary bodies are on the ventral surface of the brain at the mid level of the midbrain. That's one of them.
Oh.
We'll see it better. You guys found the mammillary bodies over there, right?
Yeah.
We'll see them. It's easier to see it over there. Mammillary bodies are a really critical memory relay, right? In alcoholism, chronic alcoholism, they are degraded by a lack of B vitamins, and people will begin to have poor memory, and they will begin to confabulate, which is
So
means
then
they
what
will
is
tell
this?
stories.
So what's the big bump on here? Like what is that?
That is looks like a commissure, something odd there coming across. It's not a mammillary body. I think it's the anterior commissure. Down here. Here's one,
Okay.
and the other is,
This right here?
Yeah, right here.
This spot?
yep.
So is that one right there?
No.
So okay, so where is it? Oh.
The other one is right here.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we can find it on the healthy brain a little bit easier.
Um.
So they will begin to confabulate. Confabulate means you tell lies that you believe that they're true. And together, the symptoms of that are called Korsakoff syndrome.
Korsakov.
All right,
Right.
keep going. What else did you find?
Oh, what was next on our list? I don't remember.
The
Septum pellucidum.
The cingulate gyrus and cingulate sulci.
The cingulate gyrus. Shit. So yeah, I didn't mean to do that. So the cingulate gyrus is right here.
Follows the whole, all the way on top of this, right, all the way around. Keep going.
Yeah.
Good. Cingulate gyrus goes all the way over the corpus
Yeah.
callosum. All the way.
And then the cingulate sulcus would be
Nice. I
right.
didn't even ask them to find the cingulate sulcus, but they did. That's good work. Did I?
And then this would be the lateral ventricle.
In there, the space, and what's the stuff between them, between the ventricles? Close. Well, no. Septum pellucidum.
Yeah,
is a
septum
divider.
pellucidum. It's like this covering right here.
Right. Well, it's a divider between the left and right
Yeah.
ventricles. It's huge in this person because the ventricles are so big.
Is it supposed to be that?
Yeah, the optic nerve.
What's that?
Didn't
Is
we
it
say the
supposed to be
optic
that, like,
nerve was right
thin
here?
Okay.
So the optic nerve is right here.
Right. Cranial nerve number
2.
2. When a nerve is in the periphery, we call it a nerve. When it enters the central nervous system, we call it a
Tract.
tract. And in this case, we have optic nerve out here.
Mhm.
This is the optic chiasm.
Yeah.
And then as it continues on, it becomes the optic tract. Okay? So make sure when you grab, you don't grab. This is not the optic nerve, that's the optic
Oh, yeah.
chiasm. This is the optic nerve.
Yeah.
And there are 2 optic nerves, obviously, one for each fovea.
And then
Did you find the hypothalamus?
What's your
the
list?
hypothalamus.
Other people found the thalamus and the hypothalamus, right?
We weren't able to like the
Oh, wait, yeah, we did.
hypothalamus is below.
Okay, so
Oh yeah, we found the dorsipalamus.
Yeah.
you guys see my fingers here?
Oh yeah, the dorsal thalamus was right here.
That's the thalamus. Good.
Yeah,
The
so
whole
then below it would be the hypothalamus.
So you went below and posterior. You have to go below and anterior. Let me help you out. That's okay. That's all right. It's tricky, right? What I wanted you to do was look, and then we'll clarify. Okay? So my thumb and forefinger there are doing a pincer grasp on the third ventricle. Do you see it? Okay? And the thalamic nuclei, right, on either side are basically the tip of my finger here and the tip of my thumb here. They make the walls, the lateral walls of the third ventricle, right? The lateral and posterior walls of the third ventricle. Okay, so that means that if I take this forceps and poke here, where's the probe? Probe is there. Too sharp. Right? The tip of the probe is resting on the left thalamus.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that? This whole structure in here. That the third ventricle is the space, but what I'm touching is the thalamus. Okay, does that make sense? So it's sitting right around, right, the third ventricle.
Which
Makes
means the
sense?
hypothalamus wouldn't it be there?
So the hypothalamus is inferior and slightly anterior to the anterior this direction to the thalamus. Okay, so here I'll give you a. How many more structures do you have to look for here?
How many more?
The tectum
The tectum. I don't even remember where the tectum is.
is by the
Yeah.
fourth ventricle.
Which?
You know what? We'll do the tectum at the end over there.
Okay.
Here, follow me over here real quick.
Okay.
I want to show you something.
Sorry.
Say your name again.
Nathaniel.
What's that?
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel, right? Okay, good. In this case, we're looking at the midbrain. Jake, you want to come over?
This is a healthy brain?
It's a healthy brain, but it's suffered much abuse at the hands of all of us, right?
Yeah.
Sad.
In this case, can you bring that guy over? All right, good. Thank you. Where did you? I asked you guys to find the third ventricle as well. Where did you find the third ventricle?
This hole right.
It's in that hole, right? The tip of the probe is actually in the third ventricle, right?
What?
Yeah. So remember, what he's done, right, is this guy's like that, right?
Yeah.
And down in that hole, if you look down in that hole, there's the third ventricle down in there.
Oh,
Alright.
so because it's cut that way, that's why we can't
Well,
see
so the only thing that's cut off here is the brainstem and the cerebellum.
it. Okay.
So this goes like this, right? So we can see that that hole there leads into the third ventricle. So what would be there in life, dangling from that hole?
Nerves?
Not a nerve,
No.
not the spine. No, no.
No, that
It's
would
way too
be.
anterior from the spine.
Yeah, the spine would sit right here.
The pituitary gland. Yes. All right. So it's easier to see base of the skull. Okay. Flip it upside down. All right. So Nathaniel.
Yes.
Nathaniel.
Yeah, Nathaniel is fine.
Come on,
Nathaniel.
don't-
Nathaniel is.
That was
Nathaniel?
your name
Yeah,
the whole
Nathaniel.
time? And you got me
Nathaniel.
calling you Sinai.
So here we have in the base of the skull we have the cribriform plate,
Mm-hmm.
which has perforations into the nasal cavities, right?
Yeah.
What's going to rest there in life? Not the pituitary gland. Olfactory bulb. Show me the
Yeah.
olfactory bulb, sir.
The olfactory.
That's what you get for
bulb.
being right.
It would be right here, right?
Yes.
No, let him do it.
There's the olfactory.
That you just moved it. That you just had it. That's it. That's it. Those are the olfactory bulbs.
Flopping it
Yeah.
around.
That right there?
Those are the olfactory bulbs. Good work. That's an olfactory bulb, also called cranial nerve number one. El numero uno. Sitting right here. The cranial. Okay. So we're going to follow this guy back, right? We follow that posteriorly, and there'll be these little holes. And my goodness, look where they're leading. They're leading into ye old
Eyes.
orbits, right? Right? And so that must be where the optic nerve comes out. All right. So show us, if you would, Nathaniel. It'll take me a while. I'm working on it.
It's still taking me a while, and he
Oh.
lives in the same apartment complex as me.
So where would the optic nerves be?
So right here.
That's olfactory.
Oh, the optic nerve.
Optic nerves. How about?
Oh, right there. These two.
Yeah, it's cut off. These guys right
Yeah.
here. They've done been seven, but this one's a little bit. You can see it more easily here. You see that big honking nerve coming out of there?
Yeah.
Can you grab the probe and?
He'd lie to
No, this guy right here.
Right there.
That's the optic nerve, right? And the optic chiasm is right here, right? Okay, so that must be there, right? And just posterior to that is the good old Turkish saddle,
Yeah.
the sella turcica, right here,
Which is where the pituitary sits.
which is where the pituitary sits because there's all this vasculature coming up, right? And so that hole there is where the infundibular stalk was, which is a really cool structure because it has the word fun. That's right, infundibular stalk, or the infundibulum. And dangling at the end of the infundibular stalk would be the pituitary gland, but it dangles into the sella turcica in here, right? And it's surrounded by vasculature, so when I reach in, like this, after cutting the skull open, I reach in, and you actually have to pull this back and sever the brainstem that way,
Oh.
right? And then you pull that out, what happens to the pituitary gland? It stays stuck in the sella turcica all the time, so that's why you don't see it there.
Oh, it stays stuck?
So
Yeah.
it's in the skull.
Well, it would be in the skull of the cadavers next door.
Yeah.
Right? You could go look for it if you want next semester. It could be on a pituitary gland hunt. And just posterior to that, we have mammillary bodies. Those are those guys right there on the ventral surface of the brain. Much easier to see in this slice,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Although they've been pinned a lot of times, that's why they're in such bad shape.
Well, they're harder to see laterally.
Yeah, they're harder to see laterally. Good. And just posterior to that, we enter into the midbrain, right? And tell us some of the structures that you found in the midbrain.
I'll point, Jake. Go ahead. The Niagara one?
Yep.
Substantia nigra, which means
Black.
black substance.
Oh.
Why is it black?
Oh, that's a good question.
Dopamine, the byproduct of the production of dopamine.
But it.
If this person had suffered from Parkinson's disease, you wouldn't see it at all.
Really?
It is the primary pathophysiology of Parkinson's disease is the degradation of the substantia nigra.
Oh. But
And
this
then,
brain looks healthy.
There's one hole right here.
Oh, that's not supposed to be a hole. Don't put too hard.
it's not?
That's a pinhole.
Oh, okay, my bad.
Yeah, that's right.
How about this one?
That's the what is that?
Yeah. Do we have our
Cerebral aqueduct.
Excellent. Cerebral aqueduct, right? Which connects third and fourth ventricle. So you found the cerebral aqueduct there. Find it here, would you please? I'm just making it hard for you so that you,
Oh, yeah.
because you're going to have to go tutor Mustafa about the whole thing. So you have to That's what you get for having friends who are having babies.
Right.
No, keep it on this side.
Right?
She's in labor.
Who?
First, find the third ventricle.
Here.
Here,
Oh, on this side.
right? So this is a mid-sagittal slice of just the brainstem and the cerebellum.
Okay.
Okay? So what's my finger pushing up against?
The hypothalamus.
Hypothalamus is here.
Oh.
What's my finger pushing up
The
against?
thalamus?
The thalamus, because the thalamus forms the wall of the third ventricle, right? So
Yeah.
okay, so now we know this is the third ventricle. Do you see a pathway, a little aqueduct that goes inferior from that might lead to another ventricle?
Just follow it.
From this space here.
Oh, right here.
Yeah, that you'd be leaving the meninges of the brain. There it is. That's the cerebral aqueduct. Good. So point to the cerebral aqueduct here. Now point to it here.
And then where's the?
Orientation. Oh, right here.
Good. Point to it here. No. There. Good.
Also, starting from
Yeah, starting from there to there.
Okay.
What's the fourth ventricle? That ventricle. This triangle there is the fourth ventricle.
Okay.
Yep. So point to it here.
Somewhere here.
Gently.
Right in the middle.
A little higher. A little more interior. It's
Bingo.
right there.
Right here.
It,
Oh, yeah,
it
so
must
this
come out
is-
of the third ventricle, right? See it?
That's the fourth ventricle or the
The
cerebral?
fourth ventricle. This is the third ventricle in here. Cerebral aqueduct.
Yeah.
Third ventricle. Cerebral aqueduct.
Fourth.
Fourth ventricle. Inferior, right anterior to the cerebellum. All right? And surrounding the cerebral aqueduct is the
Aqueduct of Gray.
periaqueductal gray. Peri meaning around, right? Periaqueductal gray, which is gray matter there. One of the most interesting things about the periaqueductal gray is that when you're in trouble, something terrible is happening. We need to run. I can't pay attention to this thorn in my foot. Like you're running from like the tiger. You're like, ow! There's a thorn in my foot. Oh, right, you don't stop to do that. You don't even pay attention to that. You just run. How do you suppress that pain? Periaqueductal gray. Hypothalamus stimulating the periaqueductal gray. Periaqueductal gray causing the release of endorphins in your spinal cord, suppressing incoming pain in the dorsal horn. You're like, what are all those words? By the end, you will know. you wouldn't know, right? The periaqueductal gray, if I were to stick an electrode into the periaqueductal gray and ask you to, like whenever you feel like it, you can just press this button and it would stimulate the periaqueductal gray. If you were a rat, you would hit it until you died.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wait, so when you poked the probe
What's that?
in the so you poked it through the third ventricle and it came out through the aqua.
Cerebral aqueduct.
Okay.
Uh-oh, did I go too far?
Yeah.
This is a cerebral
Yeah, so the metal
aqueduct.
pops up in the little hole. In the little cerebral
See it?
aqueduct, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm doing,
Fourth ventricle. Where's the fourth ventricle?
it's not here because it's cut away like that, right? So that, what I'm doing is putting it's cut right here and I'm putting this right like that.
Okay.
Ah, it's like that. You see
Oh,
it
so
now?
this right here. Ooh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good.
If the pin moves up and down
So right
easily,
here
you
is the
know that
cerebral aqueduct, right here.
What's that? This is the fourth ventricle.
But this canal right here is the cerebral aqueduct, right here.
This right here,
Yeah.
cerebral aqueduct.
Okay.
Yep. What else did I ask you guys to find?
Red nucleus.
The red nucleus. The red nucleus, which is not red.
Not red at all.
Yeah.
Actually, two of them, but
There's two of them, right?
little hole up here.
Yeah, they have a hole because they're pinned. They normally in life they wouldn't have a hole on them. They have a hole because they're pinned. Show us again.
Wait, I didn't actually see it.
Oh.
Because I thought this was the hole, so, but it's not.
Red nuclei.
But not
Is
the
the
hole.
hole between? I mean, it's between.
There's no hole there.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
defect in the tissue.
Yeah, that's
Oh.
It's not supposed to be a hole. It's a pinhole
Okay.
that was made with a pin.
Okay. What is that called? Say it one more time.
Red nucleus. It's
Red
not red.
nucleus.
If it was in life, if we adjust, somebody just passed away, you take the brain out, it would be sort of reddish brown. The red nucleus is really important to lots. Yeah, it's standing for a while, right? Really important to lots of neurophysiologists who study motor control because non-human primates tend to use the red nucleus a lot. If we were to go into your brain, stimulate the red nucleus, you would do what's called a red nucleus grasp. You would, which is also referred to as a motor primitive. You have basic motor primitives that you use to we're all standing now. My goodness, it's coming apart completely.
It was like that.
Yeah, no, you guys didn't do that. Motor primitives like grasping, reaching, pulling things towards you. Like little babies can do that. You'll see when a little baby is developing. You'll see that they will initially reach without being able to grasp, right? They'll have that motor primitive there. Then they'll grasp with their whole hand.
Yeah, it's cute.
Yeah, it's cute until they grab your
Yeah.
glasses or your hair. Or
Yeah,
your,
and then you're like, ow,
ow,
you little devil.
Ow, ow, but like you can't. And then
they
they,
can support like their whole body weight
Yeah.
just from the ground.
it's very strong, right? They're very strong, right? But here's what happens. Eventually, the baby will start to do this. Yeah, we'll do a pincer grasp.
Finer.
That's cortex. And once humans figure out how to do cortex, the red nucleus is like, it's old news. It's 11:20 if people have to go. But I will continue for anybody who wants to stay. You're recording? Can you do me a favor? Can you either distribute that to other people, or you can send it to me and I will post it on Moodle just so that you have that material there. Thank you. That's useful for these guys won't be able to.
Thank you.
Rough.
What did
Rough.
you say the pinching was again?
Pincer grasp. That's cortex is doing that. Motor cortex is taking control.
You're like, cool.
Red nucleus.
Red nucleus is more of a basic primitive grasp, right?
So as adults, when we use that, is it
You
still
can
cortex?
you
or
can
is
use it, but really adults, right?
Tune the cortex.
Once you have cortex, you don't go back to that basic stuff, right?
So even if you do that same motion, it's probably not.
Yeah.
If someone had a brain injury and they were recovering from it, would they start using
They
it?
could, right? It could, yeah. That's a good point. It could do that. So, one thing to note. Remember, we're following the course of some motor neurons from primary motor cortex through the internal capsule. Where are they here? They must be somewhere in this midbrain because they get out of the brain somehow to get to the spinal cord. Where are they in that midbrain? What's that?
The internal capsule.
The internal capsule is more superior to this, right? The axon starts in layer 5. It's a pyramidal neuron in layer 5 of the primary motor cortex. Sends its axon out, joins the internal capsule. As it's leaving the internal capsule, it joins another structure that's present here in this. What do we call it? What's that? No, not the putamen. No, Ignore this. It's traveling through here. And then it must leave there, right? What structures are joining here?
Wait, where did
Where's it traveling to?
The cerebellum? Zoom out, get that.
It's not the cerebellum. This whole area is usually referred to as the cerebral peduncles, but I particularly I usually refer to the peduncles as these, which are the crus cerebri. These little Mickey Mouse ears,
Yeah.
those are big white matter tracts that are carrying these axons out. Right there, the axons form those white matter tracts, carrying them out of the brain, right, of the cortex, heading down towards the brainstem. Did you have anything else to find here?
Nope, you did it. That was the last one.
Yeah. Sorry, I took your explanation point. I wanted to accelerate a little bit.
So it goes to the peduncles.
The peduncles. Peduncles are fun to say, right? Say peduncles.
Peduncles.
You know why? How many words do you know that rhyme with uncles?
Peduncles.
Peduncles. Right? I know I always do this, but this makes me think like if you were like a banjo, like yee-haw, cerebellar peduncle, I'm your favorite uncle. Like you have like a
Yeah,
little
you can use
like a hoedown.
I'm at 43%.
43%?
You could use my phone.
4.3%?
No, 43.
That's a lot.
Yeah, all right. All right. Let's wrap
know
up.
what I do on my phone.
Let's follow. You guys don't know what I do on my phone.
Jen, nobody gets my phone.
We're pros at this.
Oh, I'm so
All right.
sorry.
We need that. Where did it?
Are we pros?
Oh, I have it here. All right, so let's follow those neurons down.
Oh god.
Okay. They're going to head down through the peduncles, right? And they're going to enter into this the brainstem. All right. So tell us what you guys found in the brainstem. What are the structures that you found? What are the basic structures?
The pons.
This is the pons.
Pons means
Feet.
bridge. Good. Bridge.
Bridge.
Pons is the bridge between cortex and the brainstem and the cerebellum. If you flip this over,
Okay.
right, look at that. You
Oh,
see
it's
all those?
connected.
Yeah, you see all those connections there. That right there is a cerebellar peduncle. The cerebellar peduncles, right? So pons is the bridge. You can see all those radiations going in that direction, right? It's the bridge between the cerebellum and the brainstem.
Okay.
Okay, so flip it back over so we can see some of the other stuff. That's the mid-sagittal slice. So we have the pons there, and you can see that in the pons there are white matter tracks. You see them all in there?
Yeah.
And also gray matter, right? The gray matter we call pontine nuclei.
Pontine nuclei.
Yeah. It wouldn't take that long to find. It's kind of a tricky one. It doesn't look anything like that in the book.
Yeah, we were like, where the
All
hell?
right, good.
Okay.
All right.
And
So-
then we know that this is the third ventricle, and then we have the
Cerebral aqueduct.
Cerebral aqueduct.
cerebral aqueduct, and then the fourth ventricle is here.
Mhm.
The vermis.
I'm gonna get you a probe so that we don't have your fingers are kind of.
Fat. No, we have a probe here.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay, and then yeah, what were we?
Vermis.
Oh yeah, the vermis. This is the vermis.
Well, let's do the parts of the cerebellum in a sec. Can you do one more thing there for me?
Yes.
Can you find the tectum? You were supposed to find that, right?
Nope.
Who was supposed to find that?
Oh,
You found it? Can you find it for them over here?
point at it.
Okay, so it's superior to the aqueduct.
It forms the roof of the aqueduct.
This?
Excellent. There you go. See, the
Where'd you
tectum-
point to? Let me see.
And the tectum,
Tectum.
Oh,
Victoria, is
tectum.
composed of how many nuclei?
4.
4. So it's sometimes called the corpus
Close.
quadrigemini.
Thank you.
The 4 twins.
Ah.
What did you say?
Close. Because I heard corpus.
The corpus quadrigemini, right? 4 twins. And in fact, it's a little hard to see in that space there, right? But if you turn it over, you can see that there are 2 bumps there. Do you see the bumps?
Yeah.
1 and 2. Okay, those
Bump.
bumps
Bump.
are they're small hills or caliculi. Caliculus is singular, caliculi is plural. There are 2 pairs, hence quadrigemini, the 2 twins, the twins there. There are 2 superior nuclei, right, left and right, superior caliculi, and 2 inferior nuclei, left and right, inferior caliculi. Right? And they are really important visual for the superior caliculus, and really important auditory for the inferior caliculi, relays. Right? And And they are particularly important in helping you to orient to stimuli in space. Okay? And so, remember I said a primary sensory cortex? Let's talk about vision. Primary visual cortex is the first place in cortex that visual information is received. If you don't get the information into cortex, you will not form a conscious perception of that stimulus. That doesn't mean the rest of the nervous system isn't responding and using that information to do something. Right? And what? Of course, right? When something appears in the periphery of your vision, right? You move to it. You automatically move to it. Why? Because your peripheral vision is actually really poor at figuring out shape and color. It's good with motion. It's basically a motion detector, right? But you want to get your fovea onto that object. You want to get the light that is bouncing off that object onto the fovea to figure out what it is. Right? You do that all the time. When something novel shows up in space, there's a car moving over there, you start to figure out, like, I got to foveate that, right? You are moving your eyes, and the vestibular ocular reflex moves your head along with you, right? And the cranial nerve 11, right, is orienting the muscles, the spinal accessory nerve orienting the muscles in your back, right? So that you can move your eyes and your head all over at the same time before you have even consciously registered that there is a stimulus. You are doing all that, right? Same thing is true of a sound. With a loud sound, you're like, whoa! Right? What's the first thing you say? What was that? Right? Which indicates you have no idea what that was, but look, you already did all these reactions. You're moving away, right? The inferior and superior colliculi are really good at helping you orient to things in space. There is a map of eye movements to particular locations in space in the superior colliculus. So if I were to go into her brain and zap a particular spot of the superior colliculus, her eye would move to a particular part in space. And if I zap the same spot again, it would move to that exact same spot in space. And if the cortex wants to consciously move your eyes to a particular spot in space, it doesn't have to communicate with all the nuclei controlling the muscles. It just zaps that particular spot in the superior colliculus, and everything works, right? You automatically move all those reflexes in the brainstem move over, unless you want to be creepy. You can override the reflexes in the brainstem and look around like that if you want to, but it's very unnatural, and nobody does that unless they're trying to be inconspicuous. And they're spooky, right?
I just did that to look at the time.
Yeah, you did that. You're like, at the time, but it's hard, right? You're like, right? It's only 11:30. We're in good shape. Okay.
You said the superior one is
Superior is visual.
visual and inferior is
Auditory. Right.
Yeah.
Superior colliculi.
Colliculi. Okay. And then, so we did the pons. Oh, the pyramids. Okay, this is the bacillary artery. All
Yeah.
of this, and then.
I just said that because I know Ali's. I'm not actually going to pin that on the exam, but Ali will ask you about all the arteries, and it's good to have that one ahead of time.
And then this is the So this is like behind the stem, and this is the flocculus.
Behind. Oh my God.
I have to practice my directions, like inferior to it. No, that's if
Posterior
I'm
and
looking
inferior. Actually, do this first. Flip it up so we can see the superior aspect of the cerebellum. Now face the person away from you.
Wait, isn't
Excellent. So you guys understand how the cerebellum fits? Hold on.
away from me this way? Is always away from me this way, right?
This
Guys?
connects to the brain.
This way. Gotcha.
Cerebellum fits like this.
Yeah, I was gonna YouTube that when I got home.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So as it's facing away, you
That
have
part comes this
two
way.
hemispheres, lateral hemispheres, right? Can you show us those? The two ones on the side? Right and left. Okay? They actually serve fine motor control, right? And other parts of the brain, but for fine motor control. Then we have a central region along here that goes all the way through that central region, which is called the vermis. The vermis of the cerebellum. And in particular, the vermis up here, right? We call that spinocerebellum because that gets information straight from the spinal cord, okay, to help you maintain balance, okay? If you drink a lot of alcohol, that's going to get decomposed. First, it's going to get shut down. If you drink alcohol continually, it will become decomposed, and you will walk like a drunk person all of the rest of your life, right? You will break that area of the brain, right? And that's the more superior and central area, but inferior and posterior, right? Back in here, we have the flocculus and the nodulus, and they are vestibulocerebellum. right? So if I were to come up to you and knock you, like,
Balance.
why didn't you? That's right, balance with respect to your vestibular system. Right. So when your
Is
vestibular
this in
system,
don't your ears help with that too?
your ears are auditory, but they share the vestibular system. You okay? Yeah. The vestibular system and the auditory system share the labyrinth in the Petrus process of your temporal bone, right? They're surrounded by bone, and so you have the otolith and the semicircular canals, which register your position of your head with respect to gravity. They register linear or angular acceleration, but not absolute velocity, just acceleration.
Okay.
That makes sense? And when you have changes in those, right?
Sudden changes.
Sudden changes, right? Your head moves. Your head, no offense, weighs a lot. My head weighs a lot too, right? If your head moves, you have to adjust the position of your body. Right? So you use your head to figure out how to adjust your body to keep you from falling over. The vestibular cerebellum is down there. The flocculus and the nodulus. Right?
These two bumps are the flocculus, and then inside, that's the nodulus.
Yep.
The little nod.
Little nodule.
Nodule, yes.
Cool, right?
So cool.
We're not done yet. Don't take them off, because we got to clean up too.
And then I
saw
guess
her go like that.
this one is better. This one is the pyramid.
Okay, so actually use these right here. Use this one right here.
Okay.
You see these two bands running down right here?
Yeah.
Running down the dorsal or ventral surface of the medulla?
Wait, no, hold
Dorsal
on.
and the-
So ventral.
Ventral, because
Ventral
this is supposed to look like this.
surface.
Ew. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. This one is like gunky. Yeah. This. See, that's. It was a. I kept.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's right, that's how we did it. Those are
um,
the medullary pyramids, right?
these two bumps
Those,
right here,
those bands, right? There are tracks heading down.
and then
Let
what
me
else?
ask you a question.
I got
Hold
it
on.
on YouTube right here.
Where do you think the axons came from to form the medullary pyramid?
Primary.
Where did they? Wait, isn't?
Say it.
Primary.
Not somatosensory.
What's the other one? The M1.
Motor. Primary motor cortex. Yeah, those are the same neuron. They left primary motor cortex, went to the internal capsule, went to the cerebral peduncles, traveled through the pons, then they become the medullary pyramids. When they enter the spinal cord, they will give you this other name, right? Corticospinal tract. And eventually they will end up synapsing on lower motor neurons
Why
in the
doesn't
ventral horn.
S1 come? Why doesn't
S1 does come up to the medulla, but it comes up dorsally.
Oh.
And we don't see it as it's in the back there. The dorsal portions. We don't see them. We could do it that way, but
Can I see that paper?
in order to talk about the sensory coming out, we'd have to make a stop in the thalamus, which makes it more complicated for gross anatomy. Does that make sense?
Okay.
All right.
And then
This
what
isn't
else
that
did we
bad.
have? Four centers.
No.
I think we covered everything.
I thought,
You
when people
missed
was
the
telling me,
olive.
I was like, what is
Oh,
this?
the olivary.
Thank you so much.
We saw that in the middle, right? Okay, I don't know where the olivary was. Y'all remember?
Oh my God! If there was a
Remember the
martini
bump?
in it.
Remember the
Oh, the bump. Yes, here. Found it. That weird olive
No,
thing.
no, it was on the other.
Half one.
This one.
Here.
Yeah.
Olivary.
Let me see.
Yeah.
You said the weird. Where?
This is half of it, right? So it's like
Go
this
get a
is.
whole one. That one's fine. You can see it
Oh,
right there.
that right there. Okay.
Yeah, that's the olivary complex.
Apparently looks
What
like
does
an
that
olive.
do?
The olive is a critic,
Okay.
and it will help when the cerebellum makes corrections to your movements. The olive will help the cerebellum engage in plasticity that will help you remember your corrections, so you don't have to make the same correction over and over again.
Olive, apparently. And then in this one,
It's good like that, right? You want that guy
and
on your
this one,
side.
it's right here.
That's right. All right.
This connects
we
to
are-
the brain.
You guys, I know you think we're done, but we're not done. There is a fundamental thing we haven't covered yet.
So this
Not
is the
yet.
brain. The eyes are looking up.
Look back this way. I want to cover something with you guys. You can clear this out of the way. Can you clear that? Are you okay? Yeah, that's fine. All right.
Because we thought it was backwards, but this part sticks out.
I say,
Alright. So just
not this one,
do these all
not that one. This I need. That's right.
You're giving me my piece of paper back.
Perfect. Okay. I'm about to fall over, doo-da, doo-da. I'm really hungry, how about you?
You want me to bring you
Oh, doo-da day. Gonna go to get Chipotle.
Oh, I love Chipotle.
I was thinking about that today.
What's that? Nope.
It's like 2
It's,
blocks from.
it's not that far.
Dude, I was
Field
craving
trip.
McDonald's yesterday. I don't know
Yeah.
why.
All right.
I wanted
They
to
wanted to make.
Okay, so I want to talk about one more thing that you guys need to think about. All right. So there are coverings on the brain, on all the nervous system, right? So there are 3, right? The deepest one. Do you remember what it's called? That's the most superficial one.
Arachnoid?
Pia mater. P-I-A-M-A-T-E-R. Pia means soft. And mater is mother. So that's the soft mother. Right? And it's the pia mater. and the pia mater we won't see that much, right? Because it's very thin and gets degraded in the process of like handling the tissue. It's deep to this structure here. This is not the pia mater. We know that because the pia mater dives into every sulcus and covers every gyrus. So it covers the entire surface of the brain.
So it's like vacuumed into it.
It's like vacuum sealed into that. Okay, but it's only a few cell layers thick. Okay, you can grab it. Now, on top of the or superficial to the pia mater is arachnoid, right? And the arachnoid, this is not the greatest example of it, but you can see that there's all this vasculature in here that's supposed to make like a spider web. Some of it's missing here. What's that? So we're going to get to the granulations, right? I wonder if, yeah, it's a little bit, but I'm not going to ask you about that anyways. Okay. So this here is arachnoid. Okay, they're all 3 are called meninges, right? So this is arachnoid, and between the pia mater and the arachnoid there is a space called the subarachnoid space, right? And it's full of CSF. Get it? I'm trying to say CSF, it doesn't work because there's no vowels. Right? So it's cerebral spinal fluid, which is generated by choroid plexus, which is in the ventricles. Although I don't think we see any good choroid plexus in here right now.
It's made by ventricles.
There is a little bit of choroid plexus in here. This is choroid plexus back in here. No, it's not. That's a little bit of the fornix. I lied. I don't see any good choroid plexus here, but I'm not going to ask you about choroid plexus. It's structures inside the ventricles. It's pretty simple to see if you. There it is. So now I can ask you about it.
No.
It's right. For the love of Jeebus, this. It's choroid plexus. See, it's like a little bit bumpy. That produces cerebral spinal fluid. And it's constantly producing cerebral spinal fluid to keep the brain slightly pressurized, right? So it's a nice cushion. Ready? Cushion. Nice cushion. Thank you, choroid plexus. Right? For all that you've done for me. All right. So that presents a problem, right? Because your brain is inside your cranium. Cranium, not so squishy, right? In fact, it's very hard, right?
Which is a good thing.
Yes, which is a good thing, right? Although my wife would sometimes contend that the hardness of my cranium might be a little bit too much. Okay. Hard-headed, get it? Yeah. Never mind. So the arachnoid has a way to relieve the pressure. Okay. You see these bumps here? They kind of look like granules. They are arachnoid granulations. Arachnoid granulations here. They are little papilla, right? They're little holes, right? Papillae, right? That extend up into the most superficial layer of the dura, of the meninges, which is the dura. Dura means mater. This is the it's the hard mother.
Durability.
Right? Yeah, hard. This is the hard mother. Feel it. Feels kind of like that the FedEx envelopes that don't tear at all, no matter what you're trying to do.
I'm making me uncomfortable when you tug on it.
Tug, 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 tug. It won't break. It's hard.
This makes me really uncomfortable.
Okay, so the dura mater sits in opposition to the skull.
Okay.
Right? The skull would be on top, and this would sit right on the top of someone's skull, looking in that direction, on the top of the brain. And the little granulations would head up right into these little holes. You see some of them are pulled out there. Right up into these holes in here. The dura actually has 2 layers. Okay? This most superficial layer, the dura has 2 layers. The most superficial layer is here. It goes over the top most superficially. Very superficially, I tell you. But the deeper layer folds in.
Okay.
This is the longitudinal fissure here. It folds in and goes down and eventually would hit, going across here, what would be here? Corpus callosum would be going across, okay? And then it would loop back up, come back in this direction, and you wouldn't be able to tell it's two layers here because they're together, but in the middle, they make a sinus at that point there, okay? That's called the sagittal sinus. You don't believe me, you say? Well, look, there it is.
Huh.
Ha! He says, ha. Now I believe you, man.
Oh my gosh, I didn't believe you. I understand.
And this is the folding down
Acceptability.
between the hemispheres. This folding, if you were to just cut the folding out at the sinus, it would be shaped like this. This is anterior. It would be shaped like that. And so they call it the falx cerebri because a falx is a sickle like the Grim Reaper. Dang. It wasn't as powerful delivery because I dropped the marker. So that's the falx cerebri, right? And so what happens is as CSF is generated, if it exceeds the pressure, right, it goes into this sinus, right, and then that drips posteriorly, right, and then it reaches the transverse sinuses that get to the sigmoid sinuses, and then eventually the sinuses lead down and drip into the jugular vein and return the CSF to venous circulation for recycling, right? If that gets clogged, that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? Your brain starts to swell because it's got too much pressure, right? And it has to go somewhere, right? It can't go through the skull, right? So that's a problem. So they put in a stent to try to drain the sinus if it's clogged somewhere. Figure out where that is, right? Or what do you call it when something is swollen? What's the itis, right? And so if the meninges are swollen, meningitis. That's what medicine. You're very macabre today, my good man. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I just wanted to show you guys the meninges of the brain, so that we knew we had it.
Okay, cool.
All right. Let's rock and roll. So what we need to do is